Marla Venson thought moving across the country would leave her fears behind. But the moment she stepped into Nebraska, a shadow appeared silent, still, and impossibly familiar. Derek Helton, a stranger with a forward-leaning stance, seemed to know her every move without ever speaking a word. From Nebraska to Colorado, then Arizona, he followed her like a ghost, always at a distance, always watching. Every camera caught him, yet no one could explain how he appeared in different states at the same time. What Marla didn't know was that the nightmare had only just begun. It was about to get far more terrifying. Marla Venson arrived in the quiet Nebraska town with the hope of starting a calm new chapter in her life. The internship she had earned at the local university was meant to be her first real step into adulthood, a period filled with learning, early mornings, and the peaceful stillness of a place far from chaos. Nebraska felt open and gentle, with long roads that disappeared into fields and skies that stretched endlessly. The town was small enough for people to recognize each other, but large enough for Marla to blend in without drawing attention. She liked that balance. She felt safe in it. During her first weeks, everything followed a neat rhythm. She walked to the university, studied in the library, bought groceries from the same little store, and returned to her apartment before the sun fully dipped. Her life was predictable in a way she found comforting. It wasn't exciting, but it was steady. She believed her days would continue like this, calm and untouched by anything unusual. But life rarely warns you when something is about to change. It began on a Thursday evening, the kind where the wind blows just lightly enough to feel pleasant. Marla walked out of the grocery store carrying a small bag of snacks and fruit. When she stepped into the parking lot, her eyes landed on a tall man standing beside a dim streetlight. His posture was strange, as though he leaned slightly forward even when not moving. At first, she assumed he was waiting for someone. People stood around all the time, and the lot was a common meeting point. She glanced again, only out of instinct. The man wasn't looking at cars or the store entrance. He seemed to be staring in her exact direction. Marla dismissed the moment. People stared without meaning to. She continued walking, though she felt a strange prickling at the back of her neck. She reached her apartment, locked the door, and spent the evening studying. The man drifted from her thoughts, fading like a dream before morning. A week later, just before sunset, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. As she walked toward her apartment building, she saw the same tall figure near the gate. He stood completely still, facing her way again. His forward-leaning stance looked unnatural, almost deliberate. Marla paused for a second, then hurried inside, telling herself she was imagining the connection. People in small towns often looked alike. Maybe he just happened to be there. But the uneasy feeling stayed with her, clinging to her thoughts at work, following her during errands. She didn't want to exaggerate things, yet she knew her instincts didn't normally ring alarms without reason. Finally, she decided to inform someone officially, even if it made her feel overly cautious. Officer Janelle Ridge listened carefully to Marla's explanation. The officer had handled various cases over the years and understood that fear always had a source, even if the threat wasn't obvious. She took Marla's report seriously and pulled security footage from the grocery store, the apartment entrance, and a few nearby roads. What she found pulled the situation out of the ordinary and placed it into something far more unsettling. The footage showed the man clearly tall, hunched forward just slightly, hands always at his sides. He didn't walk into the video frames like everyone else. Instead, he appeared already standing there whenever the camera angle shifted. In one clip taken from the grocery parking lot, other people and cars moved naturally, entering and exiting the frame, but the man seemed to exist only when the camera was already pointing at him. In another clip near the apartment gate, the camera captured him looking toward Marla's building. But there was no footage showing how he arrived or where he went after. The strangest part was how he never approached her physically. He never followed her down the street, never came close, never interacted with anything around him. He simply watched, always from a distance, always silently, always appearing and disappearing without a trace. Officer Ridge investigated further, but without a clear image of his face or any sign of criminal behavior, the case stalled. She kept the file open, hoping for more evidence. Marla tried to return to her normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every evening, she glanced over her shoulder, worried she might see him standing somewhere. She didn't know that this first chapter of fear was only the beginning, and the stranger's silent presence was far from finished with her life. Marla hoped that moving to Colorado would erase the fear that had slowly wrapped itself around her. Life in Nebraska. She wanted distance, change, a fresh landscape where the past couldn't find her. Colorado felt perfect for that. The mountains stood tall and comforting. The city streets were filled with strangers who had no idea what she had been through. And her new job kept her busy enough to stop her mind from wandering to dark places. For the first time in months, she felt almost normal again. Her first few weeks passed in quiet relief. She grew close to a few co-workers, especially Eva Marin, who brought warmth and humor to the office. The two often ate lunch together, sometimes sitting on benches outside, watching traffic and people moving through the city in their usual rush. Marla liked those moments. They grounded her. She didn't feel watched. She felt invisible in the best way possible, just another person trying to build a life. The Nebraska incident became something she tried to store away like an old memory she didn't want to revisit. 2 months into her new life, on a bright afternoon, everything changed again. Eva was the first to notice something unusual. She nudged Marla slightly and pointed across the street. There, standing on the opposite sidewalk, was a man who didn't seem to fit the flow of the city. While people hurried past him, he remained still, as though frozen in place. His posture had the same unnatural lean Marla remembered too well. Cold panic crawled up her spine before her mind even accepted what she was seeing. She didn't want to believe it. It felt impossible that the same figure from Nebraska could be here, hundreds of miles away, standing just as he had before, watching without moving. Marla tried to steady her breathing, telling herself it was her imagination. Another person with similar height, similar shape, nothing to fear. But deep inside, she knew the truth she didn't want to say out loud. The feeling she had buried resurfaced instantly, sharp and unmistakable. That evening, she contacted the local police department. Detective Rowan Cline took her statement seriously. He had handled stalking cases many times, but something in Marla's description made him pay closer attention. The unwavering posture, the silent appearance, the distance. The way the figure never walked only seemed to exist in moments. He requested access to security cameras from the street where the sighting happened. The first round of footage held something that made him frown. The man was visible on several cameras, but always positioned across the street from where Marla stood or walked. He never crossed a road, never interacted with anyone, never changed his stance. It was as if he was waiting for her to look up each time, just to remind her she wasn't alone. When Detective Cline slowed the footage down, something even stranger surfaced. The man's presence didn't follow normal movement patterns. People around him walked naturally, but he appeared only when a viewing angle landed directly on him, just as Officer Ridge had noticed months earlier. Detective Cline expanded the search radius and pulled additional footage from days prior. That deepened the mystery. The figure had been seen at least 4 times in different parts of the city, always outdoors. Always when Marla was nearby, yet never showing a clear face. It wasn't blurry because of camera quality. It looked intentional, as if his features dissolved whenever the camera tried to capture them clearly. Marla, unaware of the full investigation, began to change her routine. She took different streets to work, left at varied times, and avoided outdoor breaks with Eva. She didn't tell her friend the whole truth because she didn't want to worry her. But Eva sensed the heaviness in her silence and the tension in her movements. Marla kept her head low when walking outside, terrified she might see the figure again. And when she did glance up, she caught herself scanning every corner, every sidewalk, every reflection in a window. Detective Cline started to suspect the stalker wasn't acting out of personal obsession, but out of something more calculated. His appearances were too controlled, too clean, too distant from normal behavior. Most stalkers made mistakes, this one didn't. No footprints, no interaction, no close encounters. Only silent presence. Marla realized she was trapped in a repeating nightmare she couldn't wake from. Whatever she had escaped in Nebraska had found her again in Colorado, unchanged and unshaken, as if it had never stopped following her. She didn't know it yet. But the stranger's reappearance was only a small part of something. Much larger something designed to follow her wherever she went. Marla wanted to vanish from everything that had taken over her life, and Arizona seemed like the perfect place for that. The endless sun, the open roads, and the wide desert felt like a world far removed from the shadows that haunted her. She didn't tell coworkers, acquaintances, or anyone she barely knew. Only one person besides her family was informed, her closest friend. She changed her phone number, closed old accounts, and avoided sharing anything online. She didn't want a single trail pointing toward where she was going. This move wasn't about starting fresh anymore. It was about survival. The bus ride into Arizona passed through miles of pale land, broken only by long stretches of highway and the outlines of old motels standing like lonely islands. As she watched through the window, she convinced herself that no one could possibly follow her across such a distance without leaving some trace. She felt a small wave of hope wash over her, a hope she desperately needed to believe in. When she stepped off the bus and felt the dry heat settle on her skin, she whispered a silent promise to herself. This time, she would rebuild her life without fear. She checked into a small, dusty, roadside motel managed by Caleb Drinton, a quiet man in his late 40s who moved slowly as if weighed down by years of forgotten stories. The motel wasn't fancy, but it was clean, cheap, and most importantly far from crowded. Marla liked that. The fewer eyes around her, the safer she felt. She planned to stay only a few weeks while she searched for a permanent place, something that would actually feel like home. At first, everything seemed stable. She slept through the nights without waking to imagined sounds, walked short distances to nearby shops, and even sat outside her room in the evenings to feel the breeze. No strange figures appeared on sidewalks. No familiar posture lingered on distant streets. For the first time in what felt like forever, silence didn't scare her. It soothed her. She hoped she had outrun whatever haunted her. Then, one morning, a small but chilling discovery shattered her fragile sense of peace. Caleb knocked gently on Marla's door and held out a motel keycard he had found on the ground right outside her room. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but when Marla examined it more closely, she noticed something unsettling. The card number didn't match any room in the motel, not now, not ever. The room it belonged to didn't exist. The faint print of a slanted eye symbol sat near the corner of the card, barely noticeable unless someone looked for it. Caleb apologized, saying he wasn't sure how it got there. The motel hadn't issued keycards like that in decades. His father had owned the place before him. And Marla could see confusion in his eyes. Not fear, just the discomfort of something that didn't make sense. Marla's breath grew shallow. She recognized the tightness in her chest, the tension in her limbs. It was the same feeling she had in Nebraska before everything spiraled. She kept telling herself she was overreacting, that maybe someone dropped the card by mistake. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't random. Later that afternoon, she stepped outside to get some fresh air. That was when she saw him again. Across the dusty highway, under the blinding Arizona sun, the tall figure stood still, leaning forward in the same unnatural way she remembered. Cars rushed past him, dust lifted into the air, and gusts of wind blew hard, yet he didn't shift, didn't blink, didn't move. It looked as though he had been placed there like an object, not a person. The distance between them didn't soften the fear. If anything, it made it sharper. He had found her again. Even here, even after she tried to disappear. Marla rushed inside and locked her door. Her hands trembled as she waited for the figure to vanish or reappear or do anything at all, but when she looked again through the curtain, he was gone. Just like always. Just like someone erased him the moment she looked away. Caleb, worried after seeing Marla's shaken state, opened the old storage cabinet behind the motel office, searching through the records and items left by his father. When he returned, he carried a dusty folder that held old room logs, keys, and symbols used by the motel decades earlier. And there, hidden among the pages, was the same strange slanted eye printed on a set of tags that belonged to a private group that had once rented long-term rooms under false names. The group had never caused trouble but had always seemed secretive, too quiet, too observant. They left suddenly years ago, without warning, abandoning items that no one bothered to claim. Marla stared at the symbol and felt an icy certainty settle into her bones. Whoever the figure was, whatever the group represented, their connection to her was no accident. The stranger's silent appearances were not coincidences. They were part of something that had been set in motion long before she understood she was inside it. In Arizona, which she hoped would finally protect her, was only the next stop in a path she never agreed to walk. Agent Huxley Grant entered Marla's case only after the Arizona police realized her situation was far beyond anything local authorities could manage. The sightings across 3 states, the unusual behavior of the stranger, and the strange card with the slanted eye symbol created a pattern that suggested something organized, something deliberate. Agent Grant wasn't the kind of investigator who ignored strange details. In fact, he specialized in cases that seemed impossible on the surface. When he first read Marla's file, he immediately sensed that her situation wasn't an ordinary stalking incident. It was far more calculated. He set up a meeting with local officers and gathered every piece of footage from Nebraska, Colorado, and Arizona. Dozens of hours of video were displayed across monitors in a small temporary command room. Grant watched each clip carefully, rewinding and slowing footage until every frame had been examined. The more he watched, the more the stranger's behavior stood out as unnatural. It wasn't that he moved strangely. It was that he didn't move at all. He appeared in one position, then in another location, minutes later, without any footage capturing him walking from one point to another. Grant noticed another detail that most investigators would have overlooked: time stamps. A chilling discovery surfaced. In one instance, a street camera in Colorado recorded the figure at the exact same time a parking lot camera in Nebraska captured him standing motionless under a light post. The footage wasn't fake. It wasn't edited. It came directly from the original systems. Yet somehow, the same man had been recorded in 2 different states at once. Grant felt the cold tension in the room rise as he pointed it out to the officers. This was no longer a case about someone following Marla physically. It was something far more complex. He requested deeper background checks on the slanted eye symbol found on the motel keycard. It didn't match any known criminal gang, company logo, or government agency. It traced back to an unofficial private group that operated decades ago, a group created for psychological research experiments. According to scattered old records, most of their work involved observing human behavior under stress. Their operations were quiet, never public, and they dissolved suddenly without explanation. Their participants were often unaware of the role they played. When Grant dug into archived files, he found something that connected Marla directly to that organization. During her early childhood, the school survey she participated in had been linked to a behavioral study conducted through an outside research group. The records didn't list her name publicly, only coded identifiers. But one of those identifiers matched Marla's old school file. She had been classified as highly reactive, someone whose fear responses were ideal for long-term observation. She was a perfect subject for a project the group ran, monitoring individuals in unpredictable ways over extended periods. Grant began to understand the horrifying possibility. Someone from that dissolved group had kept the records. Someone had decided to continue the experiment without oversight, without rules, without ethics. And Marla had been chosen long before she even understood what fear truly was. But the stranger, the man she kept seeing, presented the biggest mystery. Grant cross-referenced missing persons and old member names from the research group. One name kept appearing in connection with surveillance roles: Derek Helton. Helton had been one of the group's field observers, trained to intimidate without interacting, skilled at standing unnoticed, until the moment he needed to be seen. But Helton was officially reported dead 12 years earlier in a fire linked to the group's shutdown. The fire had supposedly killed 3 members, including Derek, and ended the project permanently. Yet, the man in the footage matched Derek's physical outline perfectly. The forward-leaning stance, the silence, the stillness that didn't feel human. It was as if someone had brought him back from the past, or worse, as if more than one person had been trained to mimic his specific presence. Grant couldn't ignore the possibility that multiple individuals were being used to replicate the same identity, making it appear as though one single man was following Marla across states. As Grant connected the dots, the scope of the situation grew darker. Someone had designed a long-term psychological operation focused on Marla alone. Each sighting, each appearance, each silent moment across the street wasn't random. It was structured. The stranger wasn't just watching her, he was studying her reactions. He was assessing her fear. Marla, living through each terrifying moment, didn't know the full truth yet. Grant prepared himself for the moment he would have to explain everything to her. But before he could finalize the plan, new footage arrived from a remote Arizona camera showing something that made the room fall silent. The tall figure stood once again across a road near the motel, motionless as always. But this time, he turned his head directly toward the camera. The footage glitched for a moment, and his face, still blurred, seemed to stretch into darkness before snapping back to its distorted form. Grant felt a shiver move through him. Whatever this was, whoever was behind it, they weren't just observing Marla anymore. They were aware of the investigation, and they were letting him know. Agent Huxley Grant knew this was the moment where every precaution mattered. After months of compiling footage, analyzing patterns, connecting dots that spanned 3 states, he understood that Marla's stalker or stalkers were not ordinary. This was a deliberate, calculated operation, and any one misstep could endanger her life. Grant set up a full-scale surveillance plan around Marla's temporary home in Arizona, combining hidden cameras, motion sensors, infrared detectors, and patrolling officers. Every entrance, every corner, every potential hiding spot was covered. Nothing could go unseen. Marla, though terrified, followed instructions carefully. Moving cautiously around the perimeter of the motel under Grant's guidance, night fell, the desert cooling rapidly as stars emerged in the wide, empty sky. Marla stayed inside her room, watching the shadows stretch across the sandy ground. She tried to ignore the feeling that something was already there, as if the presence she had fled for months had anticipated her every move. And she was right. From the corner of her window, across the highway, a silhouette emerged. The tall, forward-leaning figure she had seen countless times before now stood perfectly still, staring in her direction. The way he appeared made it clear he was aware of the cameras, aware of the watchful eyes trained on him. Yet he moved as if untouchable, invincible, untethered from the normal rules of time and space. Officers held their positions quietly, motionless, tension thick in the night air. Grant watched the live feed, heart pounding, notes scribbled furiously. Then, almost like a trick of light, the figure vanished. No movement, no shadows, no sound, just gone. Marla felt the cold weight lift slightly, but a gnawing doubt settled in her chest. This disappearance didn't feel normal. It didn't feel like retreat. It felt like a pause, and pauses in this nightmare were never permanent. The following morning brought a revelation even stranger than the night's vanishing act. Marla received a secure call from federal records, confirming something she could hardly believe. The man identified as Derek Helton, the same figure who had appeared across 3 states, had been officially declared dead 12 years prior. The fire that had supposedly killed him had left no survivors, and all official documentation confirmed his death. Yet here he had been, alive or somehow recreated, stalking her for months, crossing state lines without leaving a trace. Grant realized that this was no simple case of a person following another. This was an operation that defied the rules of reality, or at least defied any normal understanding of human behavior and logistics. Further investigation revealed another shocking possibility. Derek may have never truly been alone. The group connected to the slanted eye symbol had trained individuals in perfect imitation. They could replicate movement, posture, and even certain psychological cues, making multiple people appear as a single entity across different locations. The thought chilled Grant to his core. This meant that the threat was not only persistent, it was potentially multiplying. A network of invisible observers capable of terrifying Marla without ever being physically close. Marla was moved into a federal protection program immediately. Her routines became rigidly structured. Her movements monitored not just for her safety, but to gather evidence against the elusive group. Months passed without sightings. The sense of relief was intoxicating, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself small moments of calm. She even smiled occasionally, letting the sun warm her through the curtains. She dared to believe the nightmare had ended. Then, 3 months later, the unthinkable happened. A highway camera in Nevada, part of a routine traffic surveillance network, captured a figure with the same unmistakable forward-leaning stance. The man stood by the side of the road facing a bus. The record showed Marla was aboard that bus, traveling to her new undisclosed safe house. The camera footage was grainy, but even through the blur, the posture, the stillness, the presence, it was the same. Grant stared at the screen in disbelief. The figure wasn't just following her anymore. Here they had found a way to bypass all protection measures, appearing when and where they were least expected. Every safety precaution, every protective layer had been anticipated. It was a calculated, deliberate act of terror designed to show Marla that she could never truly escape. The case had grown beyond stalking, beyond psychological games. It had become an intricate, haunting enigma, a presence that refused to die, refusing to disappear. Marla sat quietly as Grant explained the footage. She understood now that the nightmare she had fled from Nebraska to Arizona to Nevada had never been random. Every step, every sighting, every silent figure had been designed to test her, to observe her reactions, to remind her that something had always been watching. And now, even in a place meant to feel safe, the shadow was there again, waiting, patient, unstoppable, leaving an impossible question in its wake. How do you escape something that doesn't exist in the normal sense? Something that cannot be caught, cannot be predicted, cannot be defeated? The camera blinked. The highway was empty, except for a distant shadow, standing perfectly still. Marla's eyes widened. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just evolved.